I have been teaching Tantra now for a dozen years or so, and working part of Tantra is working with sexuality, and so I've had a fair amount of experience in, you can say, natural human sexual response. By natural, I mean what human sexuality looks like when the cultural taboos and ways of raising and so on, when those things have been transcended, when someone flows in their sexuality, what does it look like between man and woman? Um, in other words, what would really arise on the kind of Brooke Shields and what was his name, Atkins, Blue Lagoon, what would arise really in a Blue Lagoon situation, assuming children with no culture encountering each other. Kinsey tried to study this by basically recording and getting the stats in on what people did, but that was, of course, what people in the culture did. Masters and Johnson tried all sorts of things, internal camera, etc. Got a fairly good mechanistic understanding in some ways of what's going on. And there's been other advances since then. I'm going to kind of mix and match those notions, those knowings into the story as I go along. It's a big one. Whew, probably a 2-cigarette story. Well, okay, so to begin, before what Western world calls lovemaking, I mean, I'm talking about coition here. There's an immense amount of natural stuff in terms of the meeting of the two, the meeting of the bodies, and so on. And there, a lot of the work in Tantra is preparatory for Tantra, of course, getting people into a shape where they can make their sexuality their meditation. And on the way there, just basically getting over the cultural training of how to do these things is a large, very significant, very moving, very powerful, very awesomely expansive part of the journey. One of the core things facing this work coming in is that the culture has trained us all in the mode of really supporting our eroticism. Eroticism is when the mind runs the sexuality. Normal lovemaking in our culture, I'm afraid, is really, I think, the most honest description is party A and party B have each got their agenda. They've each got their fantasizing, their eroticism, their thoughts that will make them horny. This is the definition of an eroticism. You think it makes you horny. It's a strange thing in nature, but it has arisen in humanity. Thinking and horniness arising. Anyway, they get together and each of them really borrows the other's body. They use the other as a prop for their fantasy. He can sort of fantasize himself with her and fantasize himself in a white dress at the wedding, and she can fantasize that brutal hard anal rape porn or whatever that she was watching. They come together each with their own fantasy. They play that out with each other, very much really in their own worlds, quite alone in a way. And that's the normal sexual encounter. Energy running from the brain down into the body. This is the level of sexuality where most of humanity is at, or actually most of humanity hardly even lets themselves in on that level. But this is the phenomenon that gives rise to sexologists and so on saying that the brain is the largest and most important sexual organ. Interesting notion, but for us tantrikas, sexual organs are located quite distantly from the brain. The energies might reach to the brain if they're really strong. Anyway, so that's more or less as I see the usual way of sex, around the approach to it. The other thing is, of course, candlelight dinners, looking into the eyes, seeing here, falling in love with this stuff in this area, meeting that, and then, of course, the strange moment when things get kind of closer, more sexual later, and suddenly this energy reaches down and actually affects the root of this actual heat literally arising in the body from all this mentation and all this thinking and all this fantasizing and dreaming up stuff, making a mutual little thought bubble, all delicious, all of that. And there's a shift as the energy becomes real at the root. That's the point at which women describe a man's eyes kind of glazing over and he just turns into a jackhammer or a woodpecker. What to do? And then he ejaculates and then it's over. What usually happens during that physiologically as well, not usually, but very commonly, is that the woman's body at some level or other resists. So either it doesn't lubricate, which means it's not even, well, anyway, I've got views about lubrication, I'm sure you'll catch on in time. But either she doesn't lubricate, which is an indication of not being into entry, not ready for that, not up for that, or she clamps tightish with the muscles. Sometimes men really delight in a woman who has this reflexive tightening on entry, or an attempted entry. If the tightening is not too much. If the tightening is too much, of course, then the woman feels a lot of pain. It may even be possible that a male might not be able to actually force himself in, maybe. I mean, she's going to be sore and she's going to object. Or she's going to suffer and call it love. And that gives us, that plays all to the physiology of rape, is the kind of usual sexual encounter. In rape, you could say it seems with humans, nature's agenda is fairly kind. It's about getting that ejaculation from the man as quick as possible and getting it over with. So taking the possible breeding opportunity, nature's way, but minimizing, in a sense, the trauma to the body. This is why it is said in Tantra that a young man is more dangerous to the development, sexual development of a young woman than rape. Because physiologically, more or less exactly the same thing happens. They're too rough, they're short encounters, her body tries to resist entry. The resistance of the entry forces the man's penis back into his prostate gland, squishing into it, giving him sensation down the entire length of the thing, which pretty much guaranteed provokes ejaculation. That's why statistically I have heard the average rape takes 15 seconds. That's it, 15 seconds. And the average first sexual experience for a young woman with a young man, often not that different. So when it's not a strange sexuality imposed by a patriarchal culture over thousands of years and trained into the population, what does actual, sex on a level where we could call it lovemaking, where we could call it at least just absolutely natural, honest body-to-body sex, what does that look like? Well, human design in this department is very kind. I mean, we can thank all the gods that be and that don't be that we don't have the deal that cats do, for example. Go research that. Poor kitties. We have a very almost beautiful arrangement, an elegant arrangement to our sexuality, I believe. It goes more or less like this. So firstly, in terms of the energies in the two parties developing to the point where they may feel like making love. the touch, the meeting, the directions of it are more or less, what's useful really is more or less the reverse of the culture way. Not meeting out of a lot of restraint, meeting with friendliness, meeting with some ease right at the beginning of things. That's finding just, in a sense, a human comfort, a humanity in each other. And touch-wise, touch starts generally as low on the body as possible. Feet are good, but anywhere lower on the body than the little triangle of sort of earlobes, throat, breast, face, lower. In anything like natural sex, the arising energy from the body, arising from touch low on the body, coming upward in the body, that's the direction that is the naturalness of the arising of sexual energy. Rising from, you could say, the ground up. That's the natural direction. It's in opposition to the mind trying to control the sexuality, positively or negatively, in encouragement or in resistance, the mind doing it. It's the opposite of that. So bad news is, from here on, what I'm talking about is really science fiction for most of you, because really, until you can kind of go for a quick cruise on sex.com, or, cruise around the internet, or look at a few of your favorite romantic novels, or imagine a wedding or something like that and not get horny, and not from resisting the idea, it doesn't raise anything, there's no heat in it. Until you could do that, this is inaccessible. Your mind is running the show. I'll talk in other talks about what to do about that. But so, for the interests of science fiction, let's continue. So let's say our beloveds get together. They raise a real energy in each other, direct from the physicality arising through the body. Well, they start to experience arousal. So symptoms of arousal, I know the general obvious male symptom of arousal to all the sexologists and everyone else has always been erection. And they've had a bit of a different view to the male erection, and the female tissues, which are physiologically really pretty much exactly the same, pressure vessels of spongy tissue that can be pumped with blood, lie around the yoni. And we don't generally culturally, say to women, look, you're not really into this, your yoni isn't highly pumped up and all opening, but that's a sign of a start of arousal. It's a sign that comes and goes. As women know, they can have orgasms with and without that quality of the erection being there. Some men realize they can do the same. That erection is not necessarily the prime symptom of arousal. What is? Well, lubrication. Literally, nature getting the parts of the bodies ready for coition. Background music interlude. Maybe the microphone cancels it. Anyway. So, how to find themselves lubricating. I know for many men, after ejaculation, they see a clear fluid that's hyper lubricating. I mean, super slippery, coming out of the end of their penis. Some of them worry it's a discharge or something. What it is it's a symptom of arousal. Quite sad for some that it happens after ejaculation. It's like you ejaculated and you didn't actually get aroused, so how close to orgasm could you possibly have reached? Poor fellow. But this is why, from the Tantra perspective, we call what normal culture calls a male orgasm, we call a genital sneeze. So these two, they don't feel their arousal as an inconvenience. They don't push into it, ejaculate it out, or in the case of the man usually, or clamp a resistance down on knowing this because it means I'm such a bad girl if they're a woman and resist the feeling of it. No, they welcome it. They allow it in their bodies. They allow it to really happen. And if they do that, the arousal in their bodies gathers heat, gathers energy, gathers, the physicists would call it a charge. And in what Western sexologists will call foreplay, and again, generally bottom upwards, even at a particular part of the body, any particular part of the body, generally an upward direction. You can go upward touch and go down with upward touches, but generally the touch goes in an upward direction. Have I given that enough emphasis? Anyway, so are to enjoy their energies. They stir them, they encourage them in each other, they build them up to something worth calling an energy that's worth making love with. And then, as and when, after the clitoris and the head of the penis, both of them equivalent nerve areas, have been the key, really, that's what the word clitoris means, key, have opened the system that the lubrication happens, both his and hers. His lubrication, by the way, very alkaline, not that pleasant to the taste, can be mistaken for soap. And if oral sex has been happening, it will generally, it can taste unpleasant to the woman and she wants to stop the oral sex. A little guidance from nature. He's lubricating. He's ready. So both lubricated, so then entry is really comfortable, really easy. Any entry that has to be forced on any level, agreement-wise, psychological-wise, physiologically, due to lubrication, due to tension of muscles, due to any cause. I'm sorry, this is a condition that requires treatment. It's not a bad thing. It's the body protecting itself. But unless the defense is current and proportionate, there are ways of dropping those defenses. There are ways of opening to loving and so on. But we're talking about sex going well in the natural flow of it here. So lubrication is good. The yoni's erection has opened the passage, literally. And entry is really easy, and space is relaxed, yoni is relaxed, and there's the technical Christian union. So we have Bill Clinton definition, penetrative sex, male to female, is happening. Now, I know it looks natural at that point that the man turns into a woodpecker and hammers away and ejaculates. No. In anything like the natural fervors, the energies that have arisen in these two bodies, in these two people, are strong. They're substantial. They are delightful, full of delight. They're not in a hurry to clench into it and push it out or throw it out. They enjoy it in an expansive way. The sensations, assuming again natural, uncircumcised, natural, not prevented from masturbation and learning masturbation as a hurried habit, therefore not half numb and desensitized in the lingam. Such a penis, such a lingam feels, in fact the tantrikas used to even train their lingam, some of them, to taste, to know the difference between being dipped in vinegar, being dipped in milk, to be able to feel the sensations of these things, being dipped into salt water, being able to, tell these things. And the man feels, with that sensitivity, an awesome spaciousness, an absorption almost of his entire body's neural currents, and it can be quite frightening. But assuming our couple are strong in their ways and raised well to this, and either naturally developed people or people who've got over the cultural conditioning, there follows a period of delight. half an hour, who knows, can be more, can be a lot more. It's unlikely to be a missionary position. It's often likely to be that the woman leads and is on top of things. Very often. Not the position really controls who's dominating the encounter, but again, in the naturalness, it's more about a mutuality than any kind of dominance. And the lubrication of the woman continues, and her opening continues, and it makes it difficult for him to get the stimulations for ejaculation, but it makes it easy for him to get the subtle stimulations, especially of, let's call it the crash helmet, and to enjoy the spaciousness and also the movement of his lingam in her as they move, probably pretty slowly, and without a oscillating rhythm. And if they do use rhythms, their rhythms have a change to them as they go along, an evolution, a development to the pattern of the movement. But no hard thrusting, no pelvic bruising, slam, slam, slam. No scaring her body so she clenches so he can get his lingam pushed back into his prostate and make him squirt. None of that going on. And after some time of this play, this may include what the Dakinis call sky dancing, which is really she's sitting on him, feeling absolutely expansive on this energy arising from her yoni, from this lingam penetrating the yoni, and letting it carry her senses, her energy of her nervous system to as high and as far places as it can. That kind of thing certainly may happen in the natural, even though that's really a meditation form. The meditation of this is natural. And after some time, if their bodies, if her body should feel like having the more male flavor, the ejaculatory flavor of orgasm, then her body might do that. Typically, in normal sexual practice, second, third, fourth orgasm with a woman more or less in a row, and her cultural control and conditioning drops enough that she allows the flow of the amrita. Not urine, but like the male system, the female's prostate is what is now being called in the literature, is around the urethra. It tends to shut off behind and do an expulsion reflex with its contents down the urethra. It can be quite a lot more in volume than the male's ejaculate, and it has very different characteristics. It's not urine. It doesn't have the acidity and the taste of urine. It's very neutral, pH-wise, I would say. It's energizing to the male body, no kidding. It's been valued for a long time in a lot of cultures that didn't lose the knowledge of it. Men may well want to drink it, but it's not lubricating. It's very different from the lubricating fluids. In fact, it ends lubrication. When a woman has that ejaculatory flavor orgasm, and like males, some will squirt with a great tension of muscles, and some it will just pour out gently. But either which way, it washes the lubrication, the lubricating fluids, right out of the woman. Now again, this lubrication, which was strong at the beginning, which has continued all the way, this has been the woman's natural and best protection against any kind of infection, including pregnancy, if we call that an infection. It is a similar thing. Small little bug has to get in deep, find a cell, penetrate it. So all through that process, all through the lovemaking so far, the woman has been very much protected from that kind of thing. The male, even if he was dirty at the beginning, he's now been washed clean. bacterial risks and everything are very low. And if the yoni should feel like, in a sense, going for a pregnancy now, I mean, there's nothing that says natural sex continues to this point. At any point, the energies can just be relaxed into. The bodies can wind down. The delights that have been the delights that have been enjoyed have been the delights that have been enjoyed. That's when one gets past the energy where the culture says reflexively, not push it out. This is an inconvenient amount of arousal. Squirt it out in an ejaculation. No, these people are playing at energies far higher than that, far more intense, far stronger. Stuff that makes normal people really squeak. Anyway, so that ejaculation washes out the lubrication. It's also a last kind of a flush of any disease, little germs, anything like that. And, of course, the way we dress and the way we do things in the culture and so on. You think of it logically, well, most men should probably wash their hands before they take their dicks out, and hands are the great source of infection and all that foreplay and touching. Probably you should check, if you want to look at disease prevention, rather check your hands before anything else. I mean, unless you've actually got some sickness on the go, the dick's usually pretty clean by comparison to the hands, probably, with most people. Oh boy. Anyway, that last flush, happens, of that ejaculation in the woman, washes out all the lubrication. This is important. I mean, even with lubrication there, in the rape kind of scenario, the male sperm does not have that great a chance of impregnating the woman. Basically, there's two ways that sperm catch a good chance at making a pregnancy. And the one is if the woman is absolutely at a time of ripeness and her body is hanging down literally threads, like ropes really, of mucus. That the mucus from her yoni is thick and substantial. What happens then is sperm that touches that mucus gets a fast accelerator. That mucus is like a ladder for sperm. They get an accelerated run straight into home base, so to speak. That baseball analogy, that's the easiest pregnancy of all. The other way, like the more rape flavor, that's not going to happen in a rape typically, unless of course timing is perfect. But the sperm is the seminal fluid, that in which the sperm swims, if you haven't had a vasectomy. The seminal fluid is sticky, really sticky, to have a chance of perhaps sticking somewhere a little bit while that flood of lubrication washes everything else out. But when the woman washes her own lubrication out with her ejaculation gone, then she becomes really receptive to the sperm on the level of it sticking, because now there's surfaces that it can stick to. And because the lubrication is gone, the yoni contact with the crash helmet, with the whole of the lingam, is much closer, is more intense, it's more nerve to nerve. Whatever movement there's been, it's likely to now even get a bit less. Any movement at that point is extremely sensitive, also extremely evocative, pressuring towards his ejaculation. The firmer grip the yoni has on his lingam means that if he has any kind of thrusting direction, the lingam is pushing into him. Likewise, any back and forth, any bending of the lingam pushes his prostate gland nice and strongly. The closeness of sensation, the lubrication having been removed between the yoni and the crash helmet, that makes for a great intensity, a feeling of pulling at the tip of the lingam. And that feeling of pulling combined with the pressure on the prostate, yes, at that point, round about an hour-ish plus and plus as much as you like plus, then unless you really was to fight it and be good at fighting it, the male will ejaculate. So a little different from the normal cultural way, a little different from the definitions that the sexologists and the Kinseys and the Masters and Johnsons and so on would define as good functioning or good normal functioning. It's a different story from that. But this is the way of it. This is how we are wired. That, you could say, just as humans, never mind tantrikas, never mind those who take these things at a level of seriousness that we make them our meditations and so on. Just people getting along through the cultural damage and getting into just living as natural, good, happy human beings. I don't tell the story by way of teasing you with something unattainable. I tell it by way of, this is the natural. And if you're finding the way you're doing things unsatisfying, well, just lean in these directions of the natural. The surprising thing you'll find, I know a lot of people are very scared that something so deep, so basic as the sexuality would be terribly hard to take any conscious attitude of learning with and so on. But it's not so. You've got one thing really going for you, same thing as I've got going in all of my teaching. The thing that makes it really easy in the areas where it gets really easy. The ease comes from the naturalness of it. It is so easy to learn something natural, something that the body's designed for, evolved for, something the body, how to say that, something that is literally as natural as breathing or enjoying a flavor and choosing to eat this or that. That natural. That's pretty easy stuff. That's not like learning something that requires an adaptation of your natural capabilities to something else, like riding a bicycle. Is an unnatural, really difficult activity. Wow. Writing, handwriting, typing on a keyboard. Wow, these things are hard. So take some heart if you decide to take an attitude of encouraging your body, encouraging yourself, encouraging your lover towards finding out what's your birthright in the sexual department of life. What's really the natural state of sexuality, the natural flow of it for a human being. Well, take some of my hints, lean into them, and you'll be surprised how natural they turn out to be. Enough for today.